Good afternoon. My name is Susan Doyle and I will be your facilitator today on behalf of Lean Construction Ireland. I would like to welcome you to Lean Construction Ireland's 40th webinar, the topic of which is driving collaboration, leveraging the EFQM Model and ISO44001. If you have a question, please type it in the question box and we will ask Denis in the second half of the webinar. If there are any questions that we don't get answered during the webinar, we will follow up by email afterwards. The speaker for today is Denis Leonard from Graham. Denis has a degree in building engineering, an MBA and PhD in quality management. He is a fellow of the Chartered Quality Institute, American Society for Quality, Chartered Institute of Building and Institution of Civil Engineers, and a member of the Institute of Collaborative Working. A certified Lean practitioner and Six Sigma Black Belt, he has experience with Lean, Six Sigma, ISO 9001, 14001, 45001, 44001, and the EFQM and Baldrige criteria. He has worked in quality management for 25 years in the construction industry in both the US and UK in commercial, civil engineering, and home building. Denis is head of integrated management systems for Graham. Graham are ISO 44001 certified and achieved an Institute of Collaborative Working Award in 2019. I will now pass you over to Denis to start his presentation.
Thank you so much, and welcome everyone. So I wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of the next approximate hour of this presentation. I'm going to start with an overview of collaboration, talking about what that is, just so we have a common grounding on what we're going to be talking about in collaboration. Then talking more specifically about the EFQM model and the ISO 44001 standard specifically. And then we're really into the meat of the presentation, which is about the alignment of the model and the standard itself. And then we'll wrap up with a Q&A at the end. And as Susan said, if you have any other questions, you can keep a little running tab of questions and thoughts as we go through the presentation. So welcome to this today. We really appreciate you joining us. So collaboration. You may have heard this phrase or this tale, the tale of two donkeys. So it's about traditional versus collaborative working. So the first thing to say is we all like to think we're collaborative. And I know we've had this conversation at Graham that we see ourselves as a collaborative organization, a collaborative company. We work collaboratively with our clients. We work collaboratively internally. So when we talk about collaborative working, what we're trying to do is just to clarify it a little bit. So when we talk about traditional versus collaborative working, just in the common layman's terms way of talking about that, we're saying in the traditional approach tends to be on the left of your screen, the donkeys pulling in opposite directions, but they actually have the same goal in mind at the end of the day. So there can be this issue of, while we think we're collaborative, a lack of clarity, conflicting ideas, internal stresses, and failed outcomes. Because again, we actually are going for the same end result, that the donkey's going for the food, but we're going in opposite directions, and we don't always know we're doing that. And with the best of intentions, we think we're working collaboratively. So on the right, it's about what is true collaboration, and it is about the clarity of purpose. It's about not even necessarily the joint objectives, but realizing we have the same joint objective. It's having those complementary skills. So what are the positives and the negatives that we're able to work together, so that all of our weaknesses are kind of null and void, that the strengths overcome the weaknesses. What are the optimized results? How do we jointly work together, and how do we have an integrated process? So it's all about mutual benefit. So this is a really simple little image, little cartoon, but it is getting over the point. It is about how do we actually work together and get the efficiencies out of working together. Again, looking at the do's and the don'ts of collaboration, and we kind of know this intuitively. But it's about the do's. It's about, again, clarity of purpose, joint objectives, building trust. But it's then getting into more structured things that aren't just the sort of intuitive things of collaborative and working together, but it's using things like behavioral profiles. So some of you may have done Belbin assessments, emotional intelligence or EQ assessments. DISC is another popular behavioral profile. It's using those to understand ourselves as individuals and as teams. What's the best mix? Where are my strengths? How do we work together, and how do we balance how we work? So those are the positives of collaboration. And I'll talk later about how you use those behavioral profiles and these behavioral assessments to help you really leverage collaboration. In terms of the don'ts, again, it's not working in isolation. It's about a mindset as well. It's not about them and us, and it's not about having a win-lose mindset. And that's both within the company in terms of departments and silos within an organization, but certainly in terms of clients, and in the construction industry, the wide range of consultants, engineers, all of the groups that come together, and of course the client. So it's about a group win that you're looking for. And the bullet point there about having a lack of candor, it's not being brutal in your honest, but it's about being honest and open. And it's about being open and honest in terms of what are some of the difficulties, what are some of the challenges that you have to deal with. So, for example, if there's a project manager on the issue on a project, things aren't going well. By not bringing that up, and we can do it diplomatically, we can do it delicately, without addressing that issue, the issue doesn't go away, and you just dig yourself into a more difficult situation, a less collaborative situation. And if I go back over to talking about the behavioral profiles, doing a behavioral profile early and looking at putting the right mix of people on a project helps to eliminate that, as do other things like doing surveys on what's working well on the project. So these things can be raised early and raised in a way that's more general to talk about some difficulties. So it's all about trust, openness, and having that discussion and having that joint win that you're looking for. So a lot of those are, again, intuitive, collaborative approaches. And we like to refer to them as the small C. So the small C collaborative approach. We're starting now to move more toward a more structured, firm approach to collaboration. This is a small piece from a 2017 collaborative research study. And it was looking at from the psychology point of view. So these are key attributes for effective collaboration. Now, this is just the top 10. There was a longer list, and there's a detailed breakout on each of these, but it's interesting to look at it saying these are the attributes that we need when we're looking at collaboration, successful collaboration. And I'm quite sure as every one of us would look at this, would be saying, oh, this is me, this is my profile. I'm definitely strategically minded and team-oriented. But it is worth thinking about these, reflecting on these individually and within a team. So the first thing is to be strategically minded. That was the most important thing. And again, when I was looking at this for the first time, I was thinking leadership's number 10. I just actually expected leadership to be at the top. But again, in terms of true collaboration, it's having that broad, holistic view of your organization, your team, the project, and pulling all of that together strategically. Naturally, having a team orientation, that's makes perfect sense. Being a good communicator, particularly in collaborative environments. I talked about being diplomatic, but there's also being able to deal with the really tough situations and the difficult times that you can have on projects and collaboration. Open to sharing, innovative, needing an innovative solution, being empathetic, being able to understand the difficulties others are going through, and being able to project potentially what to do and how to avoid or solve those problems. Believing in collaboration, I thought was interesting. Again, you'd think that would be up at the top, but again, you really honestly believe that while you're strategically minded, there's a team focus. You do fundamentally believe in collaboration and what you're driving here. And then working its way down to leadership at the bottom. And I think leadership is 10 and not 1, because you can be a strong leader but not believe in collaboration. You can be a strong leader on a very operational level but not have the strategic viewpoint. So it is interesting to look at these, what key attributes for effective collaboration. So while we like to see ourselves as being collaborative, and we might see ourselves on that list and thinking, yes, I'm a very collaborative person, the research actually shows that yes, collaboration is key. It's critical for to maintain an edge over your competitors, a competitive business. And 85% of companies view partnerships and alliances as essential, which is great. But then you look at some of the other numbers. Only 33% have a formal, clear strategy for collaboration. So in terms of quality, we often talk about having lots of disparate good things happening. But if they're disparate and they're not pulled together, they're not all of those threads aren't pulled together in a coherent way and focused, it's not going to be that successful. So that's what this sign is. Yes, collaboration is important. Of course, we should be collaborative. We want to be collaborative. We think we're collaborative, but there's actually not an awful lot of formal, clear strategy and infrastructure. At the bottom, it talks about companies. 10% of companies feel that they're good at identifying and qualifying and securing partners and partnerships, therefore collaborations. So while we think we're good and we want to do it, the reality is that we don't really have a lot of infrastructure there to help us achieve it, and we don't really identify the partnerships very well. And that ends with 80% of companies say that major strategic partnerships fail. So it's not that we don't want to do it. It's not that we don't think we have the abilities. It's really about, and this is where this presentation comes in, having the aid and the infrastructures to help us achieve it and do it well. And so the two models we're talking about today, EFQM and ISO44001, we're going to start with the EFQM model. And I really just want to give an overview. So the EFQM model has been around since the 90s. This is the 2019 version, major revamp last year, at the end of last year, and really rolled out this year. And this is a holistic model. Again, direction, results, and execution at the very core of what it's saying is how you can drive excellence throughout an organization. And what I'm going to talk about is one particular aspect of this that this year, with the launch of this new model, really focuses on collaboration. So just a little bit of behind the scenes for those of you that aren't familiar with the EFQM model. Fundamentally, it's talking about the why, the how, and the what. So it's saying, first of all, what's the direction? What's the direction? Why does this organization exist? What purpose does it fulfill? And why do we have this particular strategy? Where do we want to go? What's the direction? The how is the execution of how we intend to deliver that. And the what are the results. So what have we actually achieved? What do we intend to achieve tomorrow? So at the core, the concept and structure of EFQM is that simple. Why, how, and what. And radar is the approach of rolling that out. It's essentially like a plan, do, check, act cycle. And the radar is results, approach, deployment, assessment, and refinement. And so those 5 elements of radar you can see is really just an expansion of the what, the why, and the how. So really fundamentally, that's what it is. EFQM model is saying we're looking at the results, we're looking at approach, deployment, assess, and refine. How do we roll this out and keep that cycle of excellence and improvement going? Now, the key strength of the EFQM is ability to coordinate, to integrate all of the things that a business might be pulling together. I talked about those disparate, wonderful, great things that are going on. How do you pull all of that together into a focused way? And the EFQM model allows you to do that. So if you have, let's talk about the ISO management systems. So if you've got 9,000 for quality, 14,000 for environmental, 45 for health and safety, and all of the others, 44 included, business continuity, whatever those standards are, you can integrate those standards, but by having them under the umbrella, the strategic umbrella of the EFQM allows you to coordinate all of those. And obviously, the coordinating of those standards would be under the high-level structure for management systems. And again, today we're going to be talking specifically about how then you take that infrastructure of EFQM that's going to help you take your strategy and help you give you the infrastructure to collaborate well and effectively. And how do you connect that into the 44001? Because the two together really do give you an effective and efficiency. The other thing that EFQM can incorporate easily is Lean, Six Sigma, Kaizen, all of those other tools, techniques, and approaches for quality management can be pulled under the EFQM model and driven in an effective way, strategically focused. The new EFQM model has a particularly strong focus on collaboration. And the development of the model was based on research. It wasn't sort of tweaking it for the sake of tweaking it, giving it a revamp. It was about being based on research and having a very strong lead on a leadership style that is less hierarchical, less command and control, literally at the high level of the model, at the leadership level. This is about how do we have collaborative approaches within the organization. Also, it's talking about that fundamental to the model is about developing culture. And that culture is based on co-creation. Again, back to, and this is quoting from the EFQM criteria, rather than a win-lose in an organizational relationship, it's having co-creation, and that with this ecosystem. An ecosystem is a term interestingly used both with 44 and with EFQM. And that ecosystem is not just the organization, but all of the stakeholders that would be involved in that. And again, not just the client, not just your supply chain, for example. So it's a very wide view of who you're including in this to be inclusive. But fundamentally, it's about collaboration. And when we look within the detail of the model itself, it's there in the nuts and bolts. So when you're applying the model and you're taking each of the individual elements of the model to roll out and implement within your business, the infrastructure is there to inherently build in the collaborative approach. So if we look at criterion 2, organizational culture and leadership, 2.3 states about enabling creativity and innovation. And it's looking in there for organizations that quote, engage in learning and collaborative networks to identify opportunities for creativity, innovation, and disruptive thinking. So it's there. It's not in a vague way alluding to it. When you're using the criteria, you have to specifically address this. And you're monitoring and measuring what you're doing. And this is all connected back to a strategic focus. 2.2 talks about creating the conditions for realistic change. So again, to quote, to work with key stakeholders to create conditions where the norm is successful change. So there's a lot of really powerful words in there: learning, innovation, disruptive thinking, and successful change. Now, there is what's been launched this year is what's called the EFQM Innovation Lens, and this is literally a new set of criteria based on the EFQM, but specifically designed around innovation. And the entire criterion focused on innovation. Within that, there's an entire element dedicated to collaboration and stakeholder collaboration. So the EFQM model has become a really strategic vehicle or mechanism, an infrastructure management system to help you focus and drive collaboration. So it's back to the start of the presentation. You may want to do it, but you need the infrastructure and help and the guidance. The EFQM model has literally been built to help achieve that. Now, I've already made the connection between the EFQM model and the 44001 collaborative management system. So bear with me with a definition of what the collaborative standard is, what the standard talks about in terms of collaboration. And it's echoing what we talked about earlier, that when we talk about collaboration, we're not saying something that's completely new. We like to see ourselves as being collaborative. So collaborative is not new. It's saying it's about building on that principle, that the relationships in business are a crucial aspect of performance and success. And organizations need to consider the catalyst required. So what's required to develop, promote, implement, maintain effective collaborative practice. So while we all say and think we're collaborative, if you're being asked, how do you systematically develop, promote, implement, maintain effective collaborative practice, that becomes difficult unless you have the structure and that well thought out as a strategic plan to implement. And at the same time, exploring and evaluating the interdependence between operational practices and the behaviors that underpin the performance and the outcomes. So there's a lot in there. The 44 standard provides the infrastructure to do all of that. And again, it's very specific, very nuts and bolts. It's going into the detail, the structure to help you walk your way through. And as I say later on, the 44 fits well within the EFQM, and so they both work very well together collaboratively. Now, 44,001. The collaborative management system applies to all that you see here. So you can have a collaborative relationship with your customers, your clients, your external collaborators, internal departments, and your supply chain. But that includes working with alliances, joint ventures, outsourcing, clusters, partnering programs. There's a consortia. There's a wide range of ways that you can work to form collaborative relationships. And again, I think it's worth pointing out, it includes within your own business. It could be between strategic business units. It could be within an organization, and it's between departments. And all of this together is what they're referring to as the wider business ecosystem, or the collaborative ecosystem in which it works. Now, if we go into the detail of, well, what does the standard look like? These are the key clauses. So we've got 4 through 10 here. The context, are you applying it throughout your entire organization or just an aspect, a division, for example? Leadership, planning, support, the operation, clause 8, and this is the core of the 44 standard. Performance and improvement. But again, operations, clause 8 is the key core clause that is the meat of the collaborative standard. And I'll just look at that in another way, because this model represents those 8 key steps. So you start at the start with operational awareness, knowledge, internal assessment, partner selection. Remember earlier it said that was a weak area with most companies. How we work together, governance, the systems, the processes, value creation, staying together, and then the exit strategy and activation of that. And that might be because you're working on a project that has a short time frame. It might be a 1 to 2 year project, or you're working with partners on a very long-term project. It's worth saying at this point that you can achieve this standard for a project, a joint venture that's a relatively short-term project that's up and running. You can have it for a division of your company, or you could apply it to the entire company. So the entire company would hold the standard. And then within that, you'd have a number of collaborative relationships functioning at any one time. But within these, you can see that at the operation, we're talking about what's the vision, the values, and leadership, the strategy and outcomes, the implementation of a plan. What are your policies? Assessing your collaborative maturity, which is going to develop over time. What are the capability and roles, responsibilities of you and your partners? Working together, the daily functioning, the continual improvement. And you can see the connections back in there to, for example, quality management. What are the things you want to drive and improve? Team management, monitoring, measurement, behaviors, and then the disengagement and the exit strategy. And again, even if you don't want this, if you want this to be a very long-term relationship, you can still talk about, if things go wrong, how do we want to handle things? So it's well thought out. We understand that as Brexit and COVID have shown, you never know the things that are going to happen out there. So being prepared, having things in place to have at least thought through that, so there'd be a smooth transition. So this is the holistic view of the 44 standard. And it was developed to establish the requirements of a life cycle framework, which is essentially what that cycle is, a life cycle framework to improve collaborative business. We do collaborative, but how do we improve that? And how do we establish a system and a process to help us do that the requirements to help us to do that well. So at the core of 44, while there's lots of things going on there, stage 6 is value creation, and that's really the value creation of 44. It's saying, how do we create additional value through the collaboration? So 2 + 2 = 5. And the importance of this in terms of continual improvement and innovation. And this is, quoting from the standard, it talks about innovation established with collaborative relationships. Another connection back to the EFQM and quality management more widely. And it's also interesting to note the reference to continual improvement. Just one example, again, is those inherent connections. And again, when I'm talking about quality management, lean. This is LCI, Lean Construction Ireland. Lean is another, obviously, element of quality management. And when we're talking about collaborative, for example, collaborative planning or using last planner is one example where you're literally looking at a collaborative tool, working collaboratively, and that's sort of within that will be one tool within the ISO 44000, the collaborative approach. So putting this together in terms of the EFQM model and the 44001 alignment. So there's a number of key and common factors in alignment so that they're not competing. You can run them they can be obviously run separately, but the whole advantage is pulling them together. They both use the ecosystem term. And so they both talk about, for EFQM, that the ecosystem is the interdependence, i.e. something that happens in one part of the system may affect the other parts of the system. It's a systems model. And the context of the organization where there's many factors to it that affect how it operates, over which there's no control. So government policy, economic, social, we're back again to COVID and the impacts. The impact on one thing impacts another. And so using a systems approach and a model approach to when change happens, where's the implications and how do we address all of that? So that wider ecosystem. 44001 and EFQM both use a structure of what, why, and how. So 44 talks about what in terms of the intent, why the explanation of relevance, and how do we implement the governance structure. The EFQM model, as I talked about earlier, it focuses really on the why, how, and what in terms of why do we exist, how do we intend to deliver on this purpose, our strategy, and what do we actually achieve in terms of results. So there's a really strong connection there as well, ecosystem and what, why, and how. 4 key areas or criterion in terms of EFQM that drive collaboration and directly relate to the 44001 standard are 2.3 and 3.1. So let's just take a look at both of those. So 2.3 is about how do we enable creativity and innovation? And they're saying that, to quote, engaging in learning and collaboration networks to identify those opportunities for creativity, innovation, and disruptive thinking. And again, in this COVID age, there's been a real need for that. So this is specifically talking about how do we engender, create, and drive innovation, and we do that through collaboration. 3.1 talks about customers, building sustainable relationships, long-term relationships. And again, to quote from EFQM, maintains a relationship with its customers during all stages of creating sustainable value, even in those phases where there's no ongoing value creation. In other words, it's working together at long-term value, and it's back to those original slides when I was talking about being open, working together, realizing that those 2 separate goals that you're each going for is actually the same thing, or can be combined into a joint set of objectives, and that really helps that ongoing relationship. There's a partner that we have in the business that we currently don't have contracts active with. We're kind of between projects together, but we're actually still working together. We're still collaborating because we see the relationship as longer term than the individual projects. And so we're staying connected and we're looking for opportunities and how we can work together. 3.5, partners and suppliers, about building relationships. So building a trusting relationship with key partners and key partners to support the objective, again, of sustainable value. And again, value is a very key word and phrase and concept within Lean. It's about where's the value added and the non-value added. How do you identify that? Stakeholder perceptions. So again, looking at the commitment and achievement of the organization to co-creation, working toward mutual benefit, and the sustainability of the relationship between the organization and the key partners. So these are all key areas that when you're using the EFQM and you're using the standard, one supports the other, and it gives you that infrastructure to help you work your way through a systematic, structured way of building those collaborative partnerships and outcomes. Finally, there's also a strong focus on stakeholders within the EFQM model. It defines these as person, group, or organization that has a direct or indirect stake or interest in the organization, its activities and performance, because it can either affect the organization or be affected by it. So that's pretty broad in terms of that what a stakeholder is and the importance of focusing on stakeholders and collaboration. So, and again, this is not just about, if you remember the ecosystem for 44001, it's not just saying your client and your project, it's yes, customers, yes, your suppliers, but the broader understanding of partners, government agencies, representatives in your community or your society, because EFQM's had for many, many years a focus on the impact in society and the perception of your organization in society, and understanding what that perception is, because perception is reality. So with the EFQM model at the strategic broad level and 44001 at the more tactical and operational level, they really do work in combination, and it's a pun, but they do work very well collaboratively. But in combination, you really are able to leverage a very powerful systematic approach to effectively and efficiently plan, implement, manage, improve, and sustain your collaborative efforts. And as I said earlier, if we're looking at the small c, we're saying we work collaboratively. That's our nature. That's who we are as an organization and people. How do you define that? How do you articulate that? How do you show that? And certainly in EFQM, you can use that model and you can do self-assessment with EFQM and you can use it to drive your business. You can also enter the awards and be assessed and get specific independent feedback and evaluation. And we've done that ourselves. But to do that, you have to be able to prove the evidence. You can talk around issues and give examples, but you need to have the evidence there. And the same with 44001, you certainly need that to be certified. You have to show the evidence and you have to show the cycle and you have to show the outcomes. These allow you to do that. So when we distill all of this down and we say, so here's all of the issues of collaboration. We're looking at 44001, we're looking at the EFQM model. We're left with, really, it comes down to relationships and value. And that's what I'm trying to articulate in this particular model. So we're saying the EFQ model is kind of the umbrella, it's the strategic global model that looks at everything. And then at the core for the systems is the 44001. But the real two core critical elements that they all have common, that they're sort of bringing together in this Venn diagram, is the critical elements of relationships and value. So what are the key relationships that we want to focus on? What do we want to achieve together? And 2 + 2 = 5. How can we achieve more and greater value by working in that relationship together, creating that focus? So this presentation is going to be available after the session is over. And what I wanted to provide here was something you can look at in detail later. But what I've done is I've broken down the EFQM model criteria, the 44001 system, and showing how they connect. So when you're talking about understanding, identify your stakeholders in EFQM, that connects over to 44001. So you can literally see the details. So for example, 2.2 talks about creating conditions to realize change, and the detail on the 44001 side are the 5 criteria there, 5 clauses. So how do you determine the scope? policies, resources, developing competencies and behaviors, and the capability and the environment for collaboration. So it helps give you the detailed nuts and bolts to help to do that wider issue talked about in EFQM, because EFQM is not prescriptive, but there's certainly more detail to help you build that architecture with 44. And again, we flow this through creativity and innovation, sustainable relationships, governance, partnership, identifying value, leveraging information and knowledge, stakeholder perceptions, I talked about that term, how to do that, and then strategic performance and outcomes. And there's different ways you can look at those outcomes to monitor, measure, and have a bottom line impact and show ongoing improvement. So I just want to wrap up by talking a little bit about a small insight to an example. So Graham have worked with LLWR, that's a partner in Cumbria. LLWR stands for Low Level Waste Repository, and it's low level nuclear waste. Now, when we were starting to work on that relationship, so if we just take this back now and think about everything I've said from the start to EFQM 44001, this is one of Graham's key pillars. Relationships define our success. So saying that we're a business that builds strong relationships forged on trust and reliability. And we make ourselves easy to do business with and follow through on our promises. And that's great, but we've got then the detail within that to talk about the sub-themes or the detailed tier below that. And one of those is collaboration. So we're literally saying, specifically saying, as part of those relationships, being successful is collaboration. And it's true collaboration being at the forefront of all of our relationships. That we listen to our clients, the partners, the suppliers, and we work with them to deliver cost-effective and positive outcomes, no matter how challenging or complex the projects are. So strategically, with the core pillars of the business, collaboration is there. We take that, and this is a way to try and articulate in terms of 44, what you've got there on the left and the right are essentially Graham and LLWR. Each organization for 44001 develops their own corporate relationship management plan. So you're saying this is how, as an organization, each of us individually would apply and implement the requirements in the management system to make collaboration work. What you then do is, for each individual project you're working on, or each particular collaborative initiative, you would develop a very specific, they're talking here about a project relationship management plan. And then that's essentially your negotiation starting point. That each of you will say, we each have our corporate relationship plan of how we roll out a collaboration. Here's the suggestion that we each come with to the table in terms of how we want to collaborate on this particular project. What are the unique things? And that's called the Joint Relationship Management Plan, or JRMP. And we did that with LLWR. We have a contract. We know what we're going to do. We know what the project is. It was a £30 million project. We're going to have this is going to be a long-term, multi-year relationship. It's still running, and that's over about a 7-year period so far. But we're saying, again, 2 + 2 = 5. How do we take the requirements of the contract and go beyond that by working together? That's the joint working together. That's really starting to work collaboratively. And when we were looking at some of those issues, this is a little chart that we put together to help us assess collaborative value. So what we're looking at here is, this is a very simple way of looking at it, but saying, on one axis, we've got the collaboration, that's innovation and learning. And on the bottom axis, we have risk. And what we're trying to say is, we're obviously trying to find something of high value. That's going to be real value we're going to get out of the collaboration. And it has relatively small risk. Obviously, if it's low value and high risk, there's really no point in doing that. But this allowed us to start thinking and talking about ideas and categorizing them, and then saying, well, obviously the ones in the top category here of high value and low risk is the ones we're going to talk about and think about. So this was something of an icebreaker to help us think about what are some of those things that really are of value to us. And this actually allowed us to address 2 issues within the clauses of 44001. One, looking at value criteria. How do you establish value? And what are the specific opportunities? So we use this to map within individual projects the particular values, the values we want to focus on, but it also allows us to map particular opportunities with potential collaborative relationships. So if we take LLWR, this is the outcome of 44001. So we worked together to achieve the ISO 44001 itself. Now, if we take that as a starting point, we got together and we wanted to be collaborative. We had a contract, and obviously it said in there that we had to work on time, on budget, and zero accidents, zero issues on safety. But the attitude of LLWR was that's 2 + 2 = 4. That's what's in the contract. But what's above that? What's the real value added? And so by talking that through, the real value added became LLWR's in Cumbria. It's on the edge of the Lake District, so this beautiful area. There are a number of small communities, small villages in and around LLWR. And for them, if you think of the nuclear industry, one of their phrases was about leaving a lasting legacy. And this is a lasting legacy of hundreds of years. And so about how do we build real relationships with the community? We're not going anywhere. This is a long-term project. How do we build relationships with the community? How do we ensure that the community is happy working with us as a partner? We're part of the community. And how do we ensure that there's environmental issues that we need to take into consideration? So what came out of it was the real value added above and beyond on time, on budget, zero accidents or incidents. That how do we make sure that we have as minimal impact on the environment as possible? And how do we work with the community? And so all sorts of things went into this, including taking more lorries and trucks off the road. And there was a spur provided by rail to bring in cars, so there was less going through the village. There was much more put into ambassadors working with local children, working with local communities in terms of apprenticeships and developing skills and training for that local community. Some people come and work within the project on a short time frame, but how do we develop the skills so they have the skills to get other jobs in a local community? So all of this became about environmental and the community and building a lasting impact. But that came out of that collaborative discussion. And as that contract's coming to an end, part of the success of that has been we've achieved another contract with them to continue on, so things went well. But we achieved, again, together in a collaborative, the ISO 44001, 2 Green Apple Awards in terms of environmental best practice, finalists for the Institute of Collaborative Working Awards under Industry and Industry Partners, the CSCS Construction Gold Award for 2019 and 18. And then last year, the ICW, the Institute of Collaborative Working Award winner that year, in a different category, this one on social impact and community collaboration, which really was the core of what we were trying to achieve together in a collaborative environment. So that's an example of how working well and putting that structure together can really help. I talked earlier about using things like DISC and emotional intelligence, EQs, Belbins, and other assessment tools. How you can use those to help you assess. And I'm thinking back to when I worked in the States. I remember working on a project, and well into the project, a couple of months into the project, realized that the team that we had together, that while they were a great solid team professionally and technically, they really didn't mesh with the ethos and the attitude and the culture of the client. And so what we started to do was shift things around. We moved certain people onto certain other projects. We got other people onto this particular project, and they worked better together. What we then did was we did behavioral assessments, both in the client, but obviously in ourselves. And what that allowed us to do was to get a better fit not just looking at the professional, the degrees, the experience, the technical abilities of the individuals in the project, but also who they were in terms of their behavior, their interaction, how they worked. And that allowed a better fit with the team working with the client. And we did that on the client side as well. And so taking the time to think through the collaborative approach by using behavioral assessments to really think about the team and who needs to be on that project, the relationships that need to be there and to be built, really do help a project go well. And as I said, my experience in the States, there was 2 months there of that could have went better, and there was then 2 months of how do we readjust, how do we put things better in place. So there was a 4-month period there that could have went better by taking more time and planning up front, to focus on the collaborative, to focus on particularly the behavioral assessment tools to look at the right profiles, the right fit to ensure collaboratively working together well. So that's an overview. In summary, I'd say that we all want to work collaboratively, particularly in the lean environment. We're always looking at last planners and working collaboratively, working together, and sharing ideas, driving improvement. How do we focus on value? And the collaborative infrastructure and systems and methods and tools of EFQM and 44001 can provide that infrastructure to help you do that in a more structured and a more successful way. And that's the end of the presentation. Thank you. And I'll hand over to Susan again, see if you have any questions.
Thanks, Dennis. Thanks for a very insightful and detailed presentation. We have several questions in, so I'll just kick it off. Are you seeing more clients interested in ISO 44001, and do you see the standard becoming more important?
The answer is yes. 44001 is only a couple of years old, and it has now taken over from BS 11000, which has been around for a couple of years, and it's no longer in use. 44001 has taken over, and there was a lot of talk about when it moves from being a British standard to being an international standard, will there be more interest? And the answer was yes. Surprisingly so, that's really picked up. On the construction side, we're seeing an awful lot of bid requirements now talking more about collaboration, but the term collaboration being replaced with 44001, again, for the whole purpose of ISOs. It's an international standard, and so the terms and the phrases are understood and agreed. So when a potential client is saying, tell me about 44001, tell us how you go through that life cycle, it's apples to apples. And so they're expecting you to be able to talk to them on a knowledgeable level and a comparable level about how you're going to actually work collaboratively, not vaguely, not in a team way, but in a very structured approach, a measured, monitored way of how you're going to do that collaboration. For us, Highways England worked very strongly. We've had LCI, Highways England speak at least one or two of the Lean Construction Ireland conferences. So Highways England take very seriously the collaborative approach, and they're looking at 44001 and ask for 44001. Network Rail, Nuclear. So more and more clients are asking for and focusing on the 44001. So it is becoming more important. It is becoming a requirement.
Okay, perfect. Another question in. Can you give an example of how you would monitor strategic advancements within a project?
I think that's back to, obviously, I'm assuming this is strategic advancements on a project with regards to collaboration. So for us, again, if we go back to sort of what was required without thinking with LLWR was on time, on budget. So to some degree, even though we achieved all of that and we had zero accidents, that was kind of like, yeah, but that's standard. So for us, it was how do we measure and monitor on the collaborative side what we saw was important. So for example, as I said, they were saying focus on environmental, focus on the community. That had to be specified. So you couldn't leave it as vague as that. So it was about training, it was about apprenticeships, it was about working with schools, it was about working with the environment, it was about what innovative things can we create, is there ways that we can have a less impact. Let's put some specifics on those. We actually then also, for example, with that worked on social value numbers. So we actually had a score for the social value impact of the project. So that allowed us to certainly in the early days, talk about here's the initiatives we're doing. And then as those were rolled out, we're able to talk about the number of hours training, the number of specific projects that were having an impact on environmental. And you were able to turn things into, for example, the reduction of lorries on the road. While the satisfaction of the community went up because there's less traffic going through the villages, we're also able to talk about we're able to reduce the carbon footprint. So those were, so it was tying back, what are the values that you want to, and objectives you want to achieve, creating metrics around those, and then the monitoring and the measuring of those as you go on. For us, some of those awards were were ways of actually articulating that. It wasn't about winning the award, but it was to be able to say, here are third-party, independent, impartial evaluations of us that allowed us to win those awards. So we did do them successfully.
Absolutely. And then following on from that, can you give us some examples of difficulties or challenges in implementing collaboration?
I think I'll talk a little bit more maybe about that example where I was saying about having to shift teams, that while you're saying you're going to work collaboratively and you jump in and you've got on paper the best people on the team, by using the assessments like DISC, Belbin, there's a couple of others I'm trying to think of right now that allow you to do those behavioral assessments. That actually could prevent an awful lot of challenges. So challenges have included, first of all, being vague about the outcomes. So that back to that question about how do you measure and monitor the strategic impacts. So while you've got that value added, define it, and they don't have to be perfect metrics and minutia metrics, but they're agreed metrics. That we both agree that this one metric would allow us to see if we're being successful in doing something and moving ahead and improving. So being defined about that, because the problem is you get to the end of a 3-year project and your original objectives and goals and measures were pretty vague. How do you measure them? You might even agree together saying, I think we've done some great things. It's really hard to put numbers on them. So defining that up front. So metrics and how you're going to measure the outcomes, being clear about those, being clear about the behavioral assessments of the individual. So for example, on our CVs now, we will say this person's got a degree in civil engineering, they're in MICE, but also what's their profile. So you'll be able to look at the profile of those people. Those really help you get around the challenges. The normal challenges of it's not working with a certain person on the project, or back to candor. If you're not being honest and you're smiling, and you're sort of frustrated with each other as you both walk down opposite ends of the corridor to a meeting room or to a virtual room today, all of that frustration, but you walk into the room and you're smiling at each other, that's not going away. Those frustrations are building, and the fact that you're both doing like the donkey, you're now starting to work in opposite directions, it's not getting resolved. Those challenges we all know about. This is not a silver bullet to that, but it is saying that if we talk about these issues, get the right behaviors, the right profiles up front, we're looking at the right values, the right metrics, it helps avoid those. Just one other quick one. If you've got EFQM and 44001, one of the things you have to do with that is show how you're monitoring and measuring. And so one way to subtly come in and raise an issue is not to talk about it, but to do an assessment and say, this is the start of the project, we're going to do an assessment. How do you think we're doing collaboratively? We've just started, we're just on day 3 or the end of the first session. Let's do a score and evaluation. And we're going to do that every couple of months, depending on the size of the project. And what you're able to do is it allows people impartially, confidentially, to raise issues and say, I think we're having a real problem here. And rather than look at and blame a person and point to them, you're able to say, okay, evidently this is becoming an issue. What do we need to do to work better on this? So it helps to sort of take things offline to address issues before they really emerge and blow up. So those are just some examples of potential challenges.
Okay, perfect. Another question in from the attendees. Will ISO 44001 integrate well with ISO 9001 and 14001?
Really good question. Yes, is the answer. So in our case, the way we've informally talked about it at Graham is that 44001 is kind of the ham in the ham sandwich, and the bread is ISO 9000. So if you have ISO 9000, you've really got a step up to start implementing 44001, because if you think about it, 44001 is asking for an awful lot of basics. It's based on the high level structure. So it's saying, what's your context, leadership, what are your processes? Do you have management review? How are you, essentially the NCR process or non-conformance process, how are you measuring that? What's your continuing improvement? Do you have management review on an annual basis? So all of that infrastructure that if you had no standards and you were implementing 44001, you would have to create. If you've got ISO 9001 or 14000, for example, or even 45001, that core infrastructure already exists. So it is relatively easy to take that core 8 sections that I showed, the life cycle, and take those 8 sections and implement them within the infrastructure of the 9000. And if you've got 14000, what you can then really focus on is, again, like with LLWR, if you've got a particular environmental focus on a project, it lends itself really well into integrating into that. And you've got nicely aligned, integrated objectives that you're trying to achieve.
Perfect. Okay, we have time for one more question. Can you talk more about how you see EFQM and ISO 44001 specifically supporting lean?
So I think on that one, it's kind of taken a step back, and it's almost like the Russian dolls. So if we agree that the 44001 is the detail, the management systems, if we take that and it fits within the EFQM or under EFQM, the other things that fit under EFQM are, again, like ISO 9000, Six Sigma, and Lean. And so Lean fits really nicely within the EFQM as a strategically focused and directed approach to drive improvement and quality, to focus on value added and non-value added, how to drive out non-value added. Again, it's a play on terms, but if you're looking at the last planner in terms of collaborative, which is a Lean tool, so those all connect nicely into EFQM for a Lean project. And the 44001 can work nicely and connect in with Lean projects again, because you're focusing in on Lean. And this whole approach with Lean of, if you're talking about big room or one room concept, if you're talking about last planner, if you're talking about working together, if you're talking about doing value stream mapping, it's all about doing that together. It's all about collaborating and culture, getting the right environment to make that work. So I think there are, on a conceptual level, on a broad level, there's a really nice connection between Lean, 44, and EFQM. But I think even at the nuts and bolts, even at the operational implementation end, you can see real connections there to help you.
Okay, perfect. Denis, thanks a million for today and the presentation. A copy of this webinar will be sent out to everyone who attended. We will send out the information shortly via LinkedIn, Twitter, and newsletter for the next webinar. Thank you again from Denis and myself on behalf of Lean Construction Ireland. You can follow Lean Construction Ireland on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and through the website leanconstructionireland.ie. Thanks again, Denis. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.